Hello YouTube, this is the Tenosia Invasion patch for Chivalry, biggest one yet. We have so much. We got 4 new maps, we've got the new Tenosian faction, we've got horses, we've got new skins, we've got bunch of stuff. It's gonna be voice lines, everything. It's gonna be fun. All right, so the biggest update for Chivalry 2 yet. New warriors. Brings warriors to a new theater of war with the new Tenosian faction, 2 huge team objective maps, 2 team deathmatch maps, and much more. Ride to war on horseback with an all-new mounted combat system, and console players can now join players on all platforms with a new console server browser. As well, a Steam release. So, basically, yes, the update highlights, we have Steam, we got horses, we got a 3rd faction, the Tenosians. 4 maps, we have added achievements, so for those achievement hunters like myself, I love hunting achievements, so that'll be great. And console server browser, so the console players can now browse for servers, which is great. Been a big request from people for a long time. Tons of combat balance. For those unaware from Shiv, so essentially Shiv 1, the story is that, a little bit of lore here, nerd time. The Agathians were on a conquest across the continent. They were doing super well, but King Argon overextended as he tried to attack Tenosia. That led to the death of King Argon. Malric, the leader of the Masons, was the head general of the army for Argon, right? That pissed him off, so he made his own faction, started the first civil war between Agatha and the Masons, and they've been fighting. So the Masons, the story of Shiv 1, the Masons technically win the civil war. They kill the king in Argon's place, King Phaedrid, who can be seen, his corpse is seen in Galencourt. So they kill him and they win the war. Now, 20 years later, the Agathians are back at civil war. They're trying to retake their throne from the Masons. But the Tenosians now see the civil war. They're on the attack and they're attacking now while the Masons and the Agathians are going at it. They're trying to finish them off 100%. So that's a little bit of backstory there. Very Middle Eastern themed. It's cool voice lines. Their battle cries are probably the best in the game. For the most part. But yeah, we'll skip over the new faction stuff. I just gave you a little bit of an overview there. We're going to jump down to the horse combat. So again, horses added in this patch, and they are only on the new maps for this update, so just keep that in mind. The team objective maps that feature the horses, there will be certain sections of that map where waves will spawn in, and you will be randomly selected and asked if you'd like to join the cavalry wave. You'll spawn in and you'll charge, right? So that's how it works in team objective. You don't find them on the map. You can still kill someone on a horse and take the horse. That is possible. But for them to initially spawn, you have to wait for the wave. And once the wave happens, you press K, just like you do when you're selecting if you want to be the monks on Galencourt or whatever. You will turn into cavalry units. And sometimes you spawn with a lance, and otherwise you'll spawn with whatever weapon you had currently equipped. For the team deathmatch maps, it's totally random. Sometimes you'll just spawn in on the new team deathmatch map as a horse player. 12 active horses can be present at one time. That's a lot of horses. That's a lot of horses. It can get pretty chaotic. We saw in the beta, from my experience, horses, they didn't seem too broken. They were just a fun time. Obviously, we'll have to see today and the weeks to come how they play out and if they're totally broken or not. But from what I could experience, I just had a good time. More fun than I had in, I'd say, like Mordhau horses. These ones were really fun to use. A little bit clunky movement-wise, but overall a good time. We'll just start from the top here. You can kick in front and behind you depending on your jab or kick command, however you have it on your keyboard. So mine is I jab with R and I kick with F, and that'll kick in front of you or kick behind you. So this is useful when you're getting surrounded by people on the ground. It knocks the person over, which is really awesome. And they have various different speeds and states. You know, they naturally speed up and they can get to a max speed. And as they build up speed and whatnot, it's harder to turn the horses. And you have to essentially look where you want to go. How weapons work on horseback. Standard weapons can attack normally while on horseback. Essentially, as you get faster, you will do more damage when you land a blow. That's how the damage works there. You get a multiplier, you'll see a nice bonus damage symbol appear, which I'll get to. That they added that, which is actually a really cool feature. But there are certain weapons that have special attacks. For example, the Highland Sword, if you use the special attack on the Highland Sword while on a horse, it does a low sweep attack on the right side. The two-handed spear does a hard-hitting stab attack, and the lance has a couch. You essentially hold the attack out, and it drains your stamina bar as you have this out, but it does massive damage. more on lance combat, because lances have been in the game for a decent bit here, but you've only been able to use them on the ground. You'll randomly spawn with a lance, right? They work the same as they did after the last patch, where they made it, you can only really hit 3 times before it breaks, but they do huge damage. You can like one tap people with them, or close to. You'll spawn with a lance sometimes. When a gallop is reached, attacks will turn into a focused, constantly active horizontal strike known as couching. And if aimed accurately, the rider deals massive damage. You can also input a timed lunge for extra damage. Oh, I didn't actually know that. So I guess as you're couching, you can tap and it'll do a little thrust forward and you can actually do even more damage. And yeah, the lance will break after 3 hits. Onto the maps. The new maps, this is a little bit of a controversial point. All the new maps are 52 players. Unlike the 64 players that we're used to on the other maps. Now, so how they're doing it at this moment, they have their own little queue, their own little rotation that you can just play the new maps, the 52 player maps. They have the 64 player map queue as well, but that does not include the new maps. So if you want to play the new maps today, you have to join specific Tenosia faction update queue. But all these maps are available in the 40 player mode from what I understand. You can play them there. I know a lot of people, myself included, I would love to see these bumped to 64 players eventually, but I don't know what they're doing. I think they're holding off because of there's hardware limitations for the old generation consoles, Xbox One and PS4. They can't apparently handle the horses and 64 players on the new maps. Personally, I would just like maybe limit them. Blues had suggested this, and I agree. Maybe just limit those console players to the 40 player servers, right? Instead of letting us all not experience 64 players on the new maps. So yeah, we have the Breach of Bodwin team objective. This is a cool map. You bust through the city and you get to this massive wall at the end that you try and bust down. I'll leave it there. We'll just kind of skim through this section here. And then the Raising of Askander. This is a cool map. So going back to Bodwin, actually, I found this map to be extremely defense-oriented. It was actually, I found it quite hard to attack, and that's unlike most other maps in the game where usually attack, I still feel like attack is a little overpowered in this game. There's not enough incentive for defense, but for this map specifically, I found defense to have the advantage. So that's something to note there. This map, on the other hand, pretty attack oriented all the way up until final objective. So essentially, the Masons are raising the Tenosian library. This is very akin to the burning of Alexandria, the Library of Alexandria. So I find throughout that whole map, it's pretty much a Mason push all the way through until the last objective, which I find defense has a chance. Similar in a sense to Dark Forest, where it's right up until that last objective. It's a sweep, and then the last objective is like the main point, and it's actually kind of hard for attack. They're both maps fun. They're beautiful. They did a fantastic job. We got to experience them in the beta. But yeah, so that's something to note there. Cavalry waves on certain objectives, as I said before. The new team deathmatch map is Desert. It's a nighttime map. The first nighttime map is just pretty awesome. TDM, there's horses around. It's a fun map. Warding Glade, which we've already had. It's now a horse map. Now with horses. So that's pretty fun there. Bunch of fixes and stuff for other maps. They've brought back Coxwell. You can look forward to that. They've tried to undo some of their harsh defense nerfs. I don't know why they really nerfed defense on that map, but we'll see how Coxwell is today, maybe. We'll most likely be playing on the other maps anyway, because as I said, they're not in the same server queue. So yeah, other changes to maps. We'll skip down. Team balance. They are trying to fix the stacking of teams and auto balance and team balance stuff. So auto balance will now only begin at the very start of the match. Before the match starts, there can only be a difference of 2 players when switching teams. You're not allowed to just switch teams all the time now, which is good because you'd have a lot of people, and myself included, we like to attack and stay on the attack. It would get to the point where literally all the high levels are on one team, and it's not fun for defense at that point. That's a big contribution. So hopefully this helps in that matter. New customizations, I guess we'll get into all that in a bit. We have tons of customizations to go over. We got armors for Mason and Agatha. We got daggers, falchions, shields, and we obviously the Steam timed exclusives, right? The special helmets for each faction, new voices, tons of stuff. All right, combat. So this is where I'm going to spend the most of the time in this patch overview. We now have a bonus damage UI. Most people are aware that certain weapons do bonus damage to in some way, shape, or form, or depending on where you hit your opponent, whether it's a torso hit or a leg hit, damage modifier will be applied. They now show you this modifier on screen when you hit someone, and it shows right beside it. If you do extra damage, so let's say you're using a mace against a knight, hit that knight with the mace, it does that extra damage. It will show you that extra damage that you did. It's a little cool feature. If you hit someone in the legs, it'll show you how your damage, but then it shows you that it was modified so that you did less damage. It'll show like a little minus and a red symbol, or I don't know if it's red or gray. But yeah, it's very it shows you now when you have that bonus damage. Okay, on to the next. Disarm. Increase the cooldown on disarm, which is a very useful feature. So if you try and dash after being disarmed, they've increased the window where you're allowed to do that. So it makes it harder to dash after getting disarmed. Same with jab after getting disarmed, starting an attack after getting disarmed, like all of these changes. Essentially, they're allowing it an easier follow-up attack after disarming an opponent, because there should be, as they say here, there is an expectation at higher levels of play that the effort and skill involved draining someone's stamina to 0, you should be rewarded with a free hit. At this current moment, there is a very slight chance that you are not awarded with this free hit, but now with these changes, that should be done. If you drain someone's stamina to 0, you should get your free hit. Horn, big change here, massive change. It's really going to help those pesky archers and vanguards that they are overhealed by the horn. So what they're doing, they only overheal a certain amount based on your class. So if someone blows the horn, before it used to do 20 HP across all classes. Now, archers only receive a 10 HP overheal, Vanguard a 15, Footman stays at 20, and Knight actually bumps up by 5 to 25. This helps in the sense that archers will be too tanky after receiving a horn buff when they're not supposed to be. Archers max HP now will be capped at 100 instead of 110. Vanguard, I forget what they were. I think they were base 120 or base 130. So now they'll be 145 with the overheal instead of 150. Footman stays the same, and Knight gets an extra 5. So that's really good. This makes it so that archers will now die one shot to Greatsword special, no matter what now. Highland Sword overhead, heavy overhead. Those two attacks did 100 damage before, but if the archers had the overheal, they would still survive with 10 HP. They won't survive anymore. It's a good change there. It makes them a little more squishy, as they should be. Something to keep in mind there. It's a good change. It's a good change. And Vanguards too, because Vanguards I still think are the best class in the game. So they just gave them a little 5 HP nerf on the overheal, which is cool. Okay, on to sprint charges. Oh, it's Moon. How's it going, buddy? Yeah, we're just going through right now. Sprint charges, they're tightening it up. You won't be able to turn as much while you're doing a sprint tackle. Useful because a lot of times people, they can really curve that. Bend it like Beckham. As they're charging through, you'll see them. They'll do like a whoosh and hit someone. They're just making it a little harder to do that, which is great. And they're also fixing an exploit, which is obviously exploit fixes are always great, where you can jump at the beginning of your sprint charge. That won't happen now. These changes are to allow dashes to be more reliable when dodging sprint attacks. It's good because honestly, I don't really try and avoid those attacks with a dodge. It's mainly just block because sometimes they still might hit you. So they're just tightening it up a little bit. But yeah, essentially here they summarize it. It was noted by community testers that sprint charge attacks have been very wide turn limit and can be difficult to read or react to. These changes here aim to make this a bit more consistent. So, and yeah, the higher percentage means that the angle is reduced. Turn cap changes. This is huge. This is a big change that we're going to go over. A lot of weapons are affected with this. They are tightening the turn caps just a little bit, specifically specials and stabs. So things to note. So special attacks on, I think this is across the board on all weapons. They're making it a little bit harder to drag those specials and really whip them around. That's something to keep in mind. Greatsword is affected with its stab. They're making it harder to stab drag with a greatsword, both with its regular stab and its heavy stab. Same with the Highland Sword, the stab on both heavy and light. Messer is affected by this. Two-handed spear is affected by this. And again, what you're going to notice is as you go to stab, you'll have less wiggle room to maneuver and drag it into your opponents. I know they've messed with turn caps in the past. We've had it so that I felt like the very first time they nerfed the turn caps was good. Then they nerfed it again and there was a little bit of backlash, so they kind of undid it a little bit, tightening it up a little bit more, but specifically on stab. So we'll see how this plays out. But it was noticeable for me. I didn't have a chance to play the spear in the beta, but the greatsword is noticeable that those stab turn caps are in place. So just be aware if you're not landing your stabs as easy as you were before, this is probably why. Spear, I do agree with the spear needing as fun as spear was to play, you were able to drag those stabs through probably 4 different teammates and around a person's block, and it was a little bit cheese. Okay, I know it was fun to do, but it was kind of unfair to the person you were fighting. So you'll have to be a little more mindful when you're doing it now, a little more precise. But something to note, and I noticed this last patch, so stab turn cap, higher number equals tighter turn cap, right? So if you notice the stab turn cap, it was 50, it's going to 40, and the heavy was 52 and it's going to 42. So a heavy stab will be a little bit easier to turn than a regular stab, but they're making it equivalent. So they're so slash, doesn't matter whether you're slash or stab. I was mistaken. I thought it was, so they are making them equivalent when it comes to their turn caps on both slash and stab. Just be aware of that. Just be aware that it might not be as easy to stab drag through people, which is, I still think it's a fine change. Again, it was a little cheese. Weapons affected by this: Great Sword, Highland Sword, Messer, two-handed spear, one-handed spear, and lance. It was noted by community members that some weapons, mostly longer weapons, had a very wide stab compared to others. This has been refined to be more consistent and reactable. It's a fine change. It'll take some getting used to. You might see me whiffing stabs today, but we'll get used to it. And who knows, if people are complaining a lot and they think it's a little bit too tight, there's always a chance for them to adjust it in the future. But just something to keep in mind for this patch. Okay, general combat changes here. You got the new siege equipment, bombards with cannonballs. I didn't actually get to experience those in the beta. I don't think I got to that part of the map where the bombards were there, but I'm excited to try it out. This change increased the height of the parry box to make blocking jump attacks more reliable. So at higher levels of play, one of the ways to get around someone's block, instead of going either left or right with footwork, if you timed your stab, and it's most effective with stabs that kind of go from over top. Spear, sword, long sword works too nicely. Anything that has like an overheaded stab or more of a upward level stab, if you jump while doing that over somebody's block and drag down into them, this is going to make it harder to do that because they've increased the height of the parry box. As you're blocking now, you have more of a block above you. Now, I don't know if it's impossible to stop it, but it will make it easier to block those jump attacks. So keep that in mind too. If your jump attacks aren't working, that's the change, and that's the reason why. You might have to time it a little better or drag a little harder. Increased collision area of hanging traps. Oh, those are like all those like braziers and stuff that you see. This is a huge change as well. These are the engineer changes. Big for this update. Previously, engineers, you had it so that if you placed a buildable down, it would, and you could have unlimited amount, your team could have an unlimited amount of engineers placing buildables and blocking areas. Now, while that was an effective strategy, I still found that the issue with it, while it stopped movement, it didn't stop people from slicing through and hitting someone from behind. And I was saying this for a while. I think it would be better if they added hit stop to it. It would make the engineers more viable, more useful. That's exactly what they're doing in this update. You are not going to be able anymore to swing through buildables and hit someone behind it. It'll stop on hit, and you have to break it first if you want to hit people behind. Now, that can be a little broken in the sense that if there's a crazy amount of engineers in the battlefield, you're not going to be able to move or do anything. Now, they've added an engineer limit, so that you can only have a certain amount of engineers on the map at one time, and it's all based on the total amount of people in the game. I think they go over it here to make sure that, yeah, so they said, we've increased the appeal of engineers by reviewing their place with community testers, with players being able to hit players behind walls and being able to destroy multiple walls easily. We've adjusted constructible collisions overall to thwack on hit. This means that your attack will hit constructibles, finish, instead of cleaving through, giving an overall buff to using them. But to keep it balanced, they've added a class limit of 12.5% ratio of engineers for a team. So whatever your team is, 12.5% is your limit. A team of 32 people, so a full server, can have 4 engineers on that team. Just keep that in mind. I do think it's a decent buff to engineers. I really found that they were kind of whatever. They only really worked when you had multiple people as engineers. But now that their walls act as stops, I want to see how this plays out and how it improves defense. And yeah, just going back to the jump stab, it says here, there exists an exploit where jumping with some long weapons at certain angles allowed for hits through blocking. So they've tried to fix that. Just keep in mind that your jump stabs might not be as good. Any other pressing news here? Just some bug fixes overall. Projectiles now more consistently hit their targets. That's good. I hope this fixes the issue where you would notice sometimes that the projectile would hit and it would like freeze in the air for half a second and then it would continue on. It looked like it hit them, but it didn't actually hit them. So now they're saying they more consistently hit their target. So hopefully that issue's fixed. Fix the Vanguard leaping sprint indefinitely. Oh, that's good. Implemented a fix to reduce the frequency of weapons becoming invisible during combat. This still happens a little bit, but found the cause. Okay, well, that's good. That's good. Good to hear, Moon, that you guys are on top of it. So you would notice, and it actually happens pretty frequently. You'll be fighting someone, they actually have no weapon in their hand, but they're still fighting you. And it does this weird animation. You don't know what they're really doing. They have implemented a fix to reduce the frequency of them becoming invisible, which is good. Fixing issues where arrow and bullets could disarm a player by blocking with a shield at 0 stamina. Oh, so it won't disarm you now. That's cool. That's a good change. That way you can still protect yourself against the archers. New carryables. So there's a whole bunch of new carryables. What do we got here? Books, sensor, chamber pots. That'll be beat someone with a chamber pot. That's funny. Clay pots, lamp, leather balls, metal pourer, metal scrolls, plates, sandals. We did experience the sandal. We did experience the sandal in the beta. That was really fun. That was a lot of fun. Beating someone to death with a sandal. Shoes, teapots, a whole bunch of stuff. Watermelons. Awesome. Okay, big change that a lot of you are going to be excited for. All those archer dislikers out there. Crossbow, they've reduced the damage from 65 to 50. That's a big change. Crossbow, after getting hit by their crossbows, it felt like you got hit by a 50 caliber. They have nerfed crossbow, so I'm sorry, archers, but it's gonna be a little harder to kill us now. But yeah, so a 15 damage reduction, that's pretty huge. And this is a big one. Warhammer is one of my favorite weapons, but after the last patch, and I guess with the community testers, they've also come to realize it was really strong. It took me a bit to realize why it was so strong, but it was really strong. Essentially, it was doing maul level damage, but faster, and it had the same stamina bonus that it had because the blunt weapons got that stamina bonus. What they're doing, they're just tweaking it a tad, reducing the slash damage from 50 to 45, the heavy slash damage from 70 to 65, and they're also just ever so slightly increasing wind-up time. So the overhead wind-up is being increased by 25 milliseconds, so it's 25 milliseconds longer to get the overhead down, and same with the heavy overhead. So slowing down the overheads, reducing damage a little bit, but yeah, communications with our testing group and examination of weapon metrics showed the Warhammer is a very powerful weapon. Speed and damage, as well as a stamina damage, which was buffed in the last patch. They made it so blunt weapons do 30% more stamina, which honestly is a great change. I love it. Makes them more viable. They were overtuned, so they're just turning it back just a little bit to balance it out. So we'll see how it goes. I do love Warhammer. I loved how it played, but it was very strong. All right, matchmaking. So we have obviously the new Q, the Tenosia. I don't know. Is it 10 Oceans? Is that how you pronounce it? 10 Ocean? I'm pretty sure that's what it is. The Tenosia Invasion. So again, this is its own little queue with just those maps, 52 players. And yeah, you got the new maps, Bodwin, Askinder, and the desert map. There's also the 64 player mode. And the new maps are not in this queue. So if you're going to play 64 player, just know you won't play on the new maps today. I'm hoping that this changes in the future. I'm pretty sure it was because of the console, the old generation restriction with performance issues. But hopefully we can see these maps go to 64 players at some point in the future. And they just changed some of the orders of the maps for narrative purposes. Beginner mode. Free-for-all has been moved to the server browser. Okay. Duels have been renamed to 1v1 arena. Server browser. Welcome console players to the server browser. You can now use the server browser. I personally still use matchmaking. I just like to find a game as quickly as possible, but you have the option of going into the server browser now and finding your own servers, which makes it easier. Since cross-platform parties aren't implemented yet, it is now easier to get in games with your friends if you just use the server browsers. Until the next update, which I believe they confirmed, cross-platform parties are coming. You can do this in the meantime. If I refresh this page, it's been updated slightly. Oh yeah, here we go. Okay, so this second, what did they change? Players now consistently spawn when starting as an archer. Oh, that's good, because I've noticed that if you select archer, which I rarely do, but I did notice that sometimes you don't spawn as that archer. Horses now animate after landing from a height or bumping into objects. Players no longer have a chance of spawning inside the horse. That's good. Players are now invincible for 2.5 seconds after spawn. That's also a good change. You get those pesky spawn campers. Players should now consistently spawn on a horse when entering a horse spawn wave. I did notice in the beta that I would try and spawn as a horse, and it didn't do it sometimes. Voiceover changes. Tenosian players should no longer run into spikes on spawn. Oh, that's good. Okay, so they're in the Tenosian spawn, as you automatically ran forward, you would actually run forward into the spikes. So that's been changed, which is good. Combat zone limit adjusted to prevent spawn camping. That's perfect. Horses should no longer get stuck in a gallop state when colliding with actors. Tons of good bug changes here. Tenosian shields now properly change factions when picked up. Awesome. Cleaned up some floating ambient corpse locations. Perfect. Cool little additions there. We're going to head back down to, we were down at the server browser. So yeah, console players can now access the server browser, which is awesome. And it includes dual yard. So PC players and console players can now all duel together on the same servers. Yeah, just some notes. So for console players, there is etiquette on a dual server. So technically it's a free-for-all game mode, but it's their proper etiquette. This is so all you console players are aware, because I don't think you guys can see the in-game text chat. In a dual server, it's not free-for-all. Okay, it might say that the game mode is free-for-all, but it's not. It's a dual yard. You're all there. It's one-on-ones. If you are seen ganging up and RDMing, it's called, hitting people at random in the dual server, you'll most likely be vote kicked. Just keep that in mind. Proper etiquette, you either go up to someone and bow, or you go up to someone and flourish your weapon to say that you are interested in dueling. If they flourish back, the duel begins. So keep that in mind for the console players. That is the proper etiquette on dueling. That is the chivalry way. Game is in so much of a better state than it's ever been. So it's honestly like so many bugs have been sorted out, so many things have been added. There's no better time to be back in the game. Don't flourish and attack immediately. Those people are scummy. We're almost at the end of the patch notes changes, are pretty much everything that I wanted to go over. Performance fixes and crashes for optimizations for Xbox One and PlayStation 4. Some animation fixes. Adjusted parry animation pitch to be more accurate to general combat when looking down. Fixed an issue where Javelin would sometimes not appear visually in the player's hand when throwing in first person. Fixed an issue during the Highland Sword special attack. The player's legs would not turn with the rest of the body while crouched in third person. Just freaking a Beyblade going around. Improve the lance animation overall. Whole bunch of animation fixes. I'll let you guys go over that. I mainly just wanted to get into the combat changes. Some audio changes. New UI stuff. Miscellaneous. We've got achievements now on Epic and Steam, so look forward to the achievement hunting. They have a key binding for the novelty item now instead of I think you have to unequip your weapon. So they have a now keybind option for it, which is good. An exploit was fixed where VIPs could cause excessive team damage, which is awesome because you're constantly swinging through teammates when you're getting surrounded. What's a big change that stands out for me? Going back to the crossbow nerf, Warhammer nerf is big. I think the biggest combat stuff of all, the turn caps are tighter on stabs now on a lot of the weapons, and special attacks. Special attacks across the board, it's harder to turn as you're using them. But then Greatsword, Highland Sword, Messer, Spear, One-Handed Spear, and Lance have their stabs tightened up, so it's harder to drag them. I'd say those are probably my biggest changes there, and as well, horses being introduced. Honestly, there's so much to this update. There's so much, and it's going to be a great time. Yeah. So, and they said that some achievements were bugged and they've found some fixes for them. So that's great there. We have some known issues here. Main weapons may spawn in as the default weapon until the weapon is swapped or thrown. That's been in the game for a while. Enemies may appear visible to the client on occasion. They did say they have improved on this, but it still might happen. Combo attack into a jab on jab block can occasionally cause attacker to get disconnected from server. I had no idea that was a thing, so avoid doing that. Don't want to get disconnected. All right, so I'm going to wrap up here with the known issues. I'll let you guys read into that. We've pretty much gone over all the combat changes. So that's going to be everything for this update to look forward to. Tons of new stuff. Again, in summary for this update, Steam. It's out now on Steam, literally right now. We got horses, new faction, 4 new maps, achievements, a server browser, and tons of combat changes. It's time, guys.